追新聞 YouTube 會籍開咗啦，歡迎加入會員撐起追新聞，多謝大家支持。
Thank you so much for those questions. In terms of the impact of the funding withdrawal and what happened after the Trump administration made these very regrettable decisions in the past weeks about the withdrawal of the funding for the International Journalist Initiative, including the international broadcaster, Voice of America and Radio Free Asia. Indeed, we see this as a huge blow for the information space, specifically in the region in Asia Pacific. But I would like to speak more about two factors that we actually see here. One factor, which is the cutting of direct funding for the media outlets. And I think we'll not see yet the whole scope of how big impact it will have for the media outlets in the region. We need to wait a bit for that. But when we talked with the journalists on the ground, when we tried to understand how deep and severe is this situation, we've noticed that in general impacts the group of media which can be considered as exiled and independent from countries such as Myanmar, for instance, from Cambodia, but also from Tibet, where these media outlets that were operating, because they cannot do any work anymore from within the country territories, were operating mainly due to the support that was coming without a doubt mostly from the US. It doesn't mean that they stopped working. They still continue work today. They're trying the best to tackle these problems, but we see that it might create more instability in the sense that there'll be less and less voices in the future to cover what's happening inside of this restricted for the press freedom regions in the Asia Pacific. At the same time, the situation that happened with Voice of America and RFA has really made a difficult situation not only for the people on the ground who are receiving the information, but also for us, for the outside world that cannot get such an insightful news about countries such as Cambodia, I mentioned before Myanmar, Tibet, Xinjiang, East Turkestan, but also even Vietnam or Laos, because these media outlets were the only ones which had such a huge support, institutional support to continue reporting on what is happening in these countries, the countries that are considered as very often press freedom predators, or basically where the access to information is almost completely limited only to the state propaganda. And because there's no voices from the outside that are broadcasting information to these countries anymore, people on the ground will not receive the news about what is happening around the world. But also we will basically have no insights about the actions of the regimes in these countries, because both media were really having amazing teams working very often on the ground, very often with the sources that could be not achievable without knowing the local languages, and providing us with very insightful, important information on the situation in those countries. One example could be with the Uyghur service that revealed the genocide as the first in East Turkestan. And this is something that we need to take into consideration, that without these journalists, without these voices, they still operate, by the way, because they still have some funding. So teams are limited, but they're still trying to continue to work with this very difficult situation. This might create a huge void in the future in the region. And not to mention that we think that China will try to use this void without any hesitation, because they've been trying to export its media model for years right now by different means, by advertisements, by on the media investments, agreements with the media outlets in the region, but also by inviting the journalists to China to, in a way, try to brainwash them so that only the China propaganda is being shared with the outside world. And I think the fact that there will be no space or very little space for the independent media outlets to continue work and to cover news in these countries will give them another incentive to keep continuing spreading this model of authoritarian model of information control, which is quite worrying. Regarding the RSF Press Freedom Index, as you know, we evaluate the situation in 180 countries. around the world. And this year we have seen a huge impact into the economic factor that has dropped almost in most of the countries that we evaluate. With Asia Pacific region, 20 out of 32 countries have seen their economic score dropping in the index, which also in a way relates to what I said before about the funding, because we see there's a huge problem, specifically for the exile media, to keep continue work due to the economic pressure they face. But to go into the situation in China and on Hong Kong, China has been for years scored at the bottom of RSF Press Freedom Index. The situation has specifically worsened with the leader Xi Jinping, who took power and grip over the Chinese Communist Party in 2012. And we have seen a very intensified crackdown on independent media outlets, on foreign journalists, since he started this campaign we call Campaign Against Independent Media. And we saw that in a way he already succeeded, because it's very difficult to find any independent media outlets still operating from within China, or if there are some that are trying to keep reporting on the situation on the ground, they're very often faced with possible prosecution. They cannot reveal the names. They need to keep underground and hidden, because by sharing who they are and basically doing this type of investigation, they don't only put themselves under threat, they also put their newsrooms, their families. And this atmosphere of fear is really visible in every corner of Chinese society, especially in the media. At the same time, we see that the investigative journalism that we see it is slowly dying out, because we lacking new generation that could be trained by independent journalists. And people really forget even how this independent journalism used to look like in China in the past. So this is something that is quite concerning. And to finish on China point, we also see that the repression against journalists is not stopping. We have cases of independent journalist Zhang Zhan has been redetained just for sharing the news about other human rights defenders and violations on press freedom. She has been detained in August. Since that time, we have no updates, even if she will be tried and when. We only know that she's facing, again, 5 years in prison for her work. And there's thousands of cases like this of journalists who've been harassed, prosecuted, interrogated, pressured, or are even missing, as with the case of Swedish publisher Gui Minhai, who has been sentenced to 10 years in prison in 2020. But since 5 years ago, we don't have any updates about what is his situation, if he's still healthy, where he's detained, and even his family cannot access this information. So we see continued and deepening crackdown day by day. For Hong Kong, at the same time, this year results of the RSF Press Freedom Index leave no doubt that the situation has become indeed very serious. And this is the first year in the Hong Kong history that Hong Kong appears in red on RSF Press Freedom map. In just short 5 years since the enactment of national security law, we see that Hong Kong lost its position as the Asia Pacific beacons of press freedom. And right now, Hong Kong is increasingly resembling neighboring China by using very often the same tactics as we saw in the China in the past. In the past year, we see quite a huge precedent with the two editors-in-chief of now defunct News being sentenced to prison term. It's first time in the history when a journalist is being sentenced for doing this work as a journalist by just reporting, writing articles, and that the articles are used as an evidence that leads to the indictment and to the sentence of the journalist. And this really opens very worrying door for any type of harassment, prosecution in the future of journalists. And we also saw that this harassment is growing because there's cases of journalists being doxxed, media outlets being faced with administrative pressure, surveillance, not to mention the increasing lack of the financial sustainability that leads the media outlets to the situation we see right now. So in general, the situation is keep deteriorating, and despite there have not been any new arrests in the past year, we see that this atmosphere of fear is really swallowing the city and leading to the journalists and to media outlets to self-censor, but also not to mention it's very difficult for them to continue working, finding sources, and to keep reporting, especially on the sensitive issues from inside of the city. In regard of Taiwan, Taiwan has been leading in Asia Pacific region together with countries such as New Zealand, Australia. It indeed gained 3 ranks this year in the index. But when we go in depth into analysis, the situation we still consider satisfactory. We still think there might be more good initiatives, especially from the policymaking bodies, to improve the situation in the country. Especially the political indicator this year have fallen almost 2 points, which is related to the rare cases of the government pressure on the broadcasters, but also we see that the funding of the public broadcasters have been cut because of the dispute in the parliament. This all leads to quite fragile situation, especially taking into consideration that Taiwan is faced with China's disinformation on a daily basis. But we also see positive initiatives and the fact that the media themselves are trying to protect themselves, starting with fact-checking that has been developed quite outstandingly in the past years, anti-disinformation initiatives, but also the standards such as Journalist Trust Initiative that the RSF have been promoting. And we saw that the first media in Taiwan and one of the first in Asia, Radio Taiwan International, have recently joined this initiative to be more transparent towards the public and to basically showcase their commitment to improving the transparency ethics inside of the media outlet. Regarding your other questions, thank you so much for asking them, because we have seen that there's a growing number of the exiled communities leaving Hong Kong, China also, and we have also seen with that the growing hand of transnational repression by Chinese Communist Party, by the puppets of Chinese Communist Party, that floods not only social media, because it's very often online harassment, but we also see that the physical threats, intimidation is quite common, especially in the countries that are considered as a safe havens for journalists, especially from Hong Kong, China, such as UK, Canada, Australia. And this is becoming very sad reality that we need to face on a daily basis. Regarding the recommendations for the countries that we would like to push forward.